Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded on camera, from an exotic pet enthusiast's fatal mistake to a construction worker's tragic encounter. It was November 3rd, 2013, in rural northeastern Namibia. A dry heat lingered under a pale sky as wind pushed dust across stretches of thorn scrub and scattered mopane trees. The tin roof of a small reptile rehabilitation outbuilding clicked softly as the metal shifted in the afternoon breeze. Inside the dim structure, wooden racks held plastic tubs and repurposed glass enclosures labeled in fading marker. The place was quiet in the way remote stations often are, where every sound, from a hinge settling to a sliding bin or a glove brushing plywood, seemed sharper than it should be. Selma Kashipa ran the rescue alone most days. At 41, she had left elementary teaching to take in snakes nobody else wanted, confiscations, surrenders, animals from failed roadside shows. She lived in a small trailer on the edge of the 20-acre property and kept a strict routine: feed logs, cleaning rotations, evening walkthroughs, so inspectors would find order even where money was short. Venomous intakes were recent and often arrived with little notice. She handled them with the tools she could afford and the practices she had learned from manuals and field guides. Donors knew her as steady and practical. She built racks from salvaged lumber, stretched every gallon of disinfectant, and drove borrowed coolers of non-venomous colubrids to school programs on weekends. Local officials started calling when other groups declined to take certain confiscations. Anti-venom and rapid transport were not resources she had. Reliable medical support could be hours away. The rescue sat behind a wind-bent line of pines. A sand road cut to the outbuildings, where a lean-to covered two long shelves of enclosures. Light bled through board seams. The concrete floor was chalked with lime to mark walking lanes. A portable camera pointed down the main aisle to record husbandry and deter trespassers. Her latest intake that week had been a seized black mamba, taken from a private owner who was keeping it illegally. Black mambas are native African elapids with potent neurotoxic venom and high venom yields for their size. Adults commonly exceed 6 feet in length, move quickly when provoked, and deliver venom that can cause progressive neuromuscular paralysis and respiratory failure without rapid anti-venom and airway support. In remote regions where medical access is limited, the risk of rapid respiratory compromise rises substantially. Warnings had been stacking up in small ways. 2 weeks earlier, a volunteer sent photos showing a sagging upper rack. Brackets were rusted, and one screw head rounded smooth. Selma made a note to replace the supports, but kept feeding the animals that day. A notice from regional wildlife authorities had reminded permit holders to avoid solo work with dangerous species and to stage transfers at waist height. She acknowledged the message in a reply, but lacked extra hands. On the afternoon the incident occurred, the video shows her staging the move at dusk. A new glass tank sat on the suspect upper rack. A hook, a clear shield, and a pair of thin work gloves lay within reach. She slid the vented transport tub toward the shelf, left hand under the lip, right hand steadying. As the tub met the shelf edge, the front bracket shifted. The plank dipped a half-inch. The tank slid forward, and she reached to steady multiple enclosures. The mamba was pressed near the handle inside the vented tub. As the sudden slide tilted the container, the lid bounced. She steadied the tub with her left forearm and pushed with her right. The only path the snake had was toward the opening and the large warm object blocking it. From inches away, in confined space, a defensive strike occurred. In the confined opening of the tilted tub, the mamba delivered a single defensive strike before pulling back, a pattern documented when the snake has limited space to follow with additional bites. The camera misses the initial strike, but captures the immediate aftermath. A sharp jerk, the tub clattering to the floor, a hand lifted toward her collarbone as she stumbled back into the aisle. Blood appeared on the concrete and on the glove cuff. Later photographs showed 2 puncture wounds on the inner forearm, where the fabric split. The hook clanged on the rack and lay still. The clear shield bore a smeared mark. She moved toward the office and opened a drawer where she she kept gauze and antiseptic. The partially unwound gauze and scissors on the desk indicated an attempt at basic wound management. Her phone remained on the opposite counter, undisturbed. The scene suggested she focused first on stabilizing the immediate area, standard practice at the facility, before her symptoms progressed too far for further action. Within minutes, the recorded footage shows her posture change. Speech, when audible on the brief recovered clip, had become slurred and her breathing quicker. Early neurotoxic effects often begin with subtle cranial nerve impairment, difficulty focusing, drooping eyelids, and unsteady movements. In the recording, the progression is visible. She steadied herself on the desk before lowering into a chair as limb strength declined. Over the next 45 minutes, the deterioration continued. The camera captured increasingly shallow breathing, intermittent attempts to reposition herself, and long periods of immobility. A trail of drops led from the office back toward the aisle and ended beside a folding chair. A bottle of saline lay on its side. The combination of rapid neurotoxin onset, lack of antivenom, and the facility's isolation left no practical path to the airway support required for survival. The footage recorded her sliding partially out of the chair a little over an hour after the bite. No further movement followed. A volunteer arrived after dark for a scheduled check-in when messages went unanswered. He found the office light on, the phone on the floor, and Selma slumped near the chair with shallow pooling beneath her arm. He backed away and called 911 from the road. Paramedics reached the property and confirmed cardiac arrest. Animal control officers secured the mamba using tongs and a transport box before transferring it to a permitted facility. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as complications of untreated neurotoxic envenomation with respiratory failure. The punctured glove, the displaced shelf, and the scattered hardware matched a structural failure during an enclosure move. Remaining animals were inventoried and relocated over the next 2 days. Regional wildlife officers documented the scene and noted the solo work, absent antivenom, and deteriorating rack supports. No broader penalties were issued. The rescue closed quietly. Neighbors collected her personal effects, and the camera's final clip, recorded after the property was cleared, shows the upper rack still a fraction low on the right bracket. A small mechanical fault that, in the end, set the rest in motion. It was May 17, 2018, and the rural construction site in Georgia buzzed with activity as heavy equipment cleared forested land for a new subdivision development. Tommy Rodriguez operated his bulldozer with practiced skill, pushing aside trees and brush to make way for the planned homes. The 26-year-old heavy equipment operator had been working construction for 8 years, but he had no training in wildlife encounters despite working in areas where dangerous animals were common. Tommy was known among his co-workers for his fearless attitude and willingness to handle situations that other workers avoided. He was supporting his pregnant wife and was eager to impress his supervisors to secure a promotion that would provide better benefits for his growing family. The construction site was clearing habitat that had been home to various wildlife species, displacing animals and forcing them into contact with human activity. The forested area being developed had been undisturbed for decades, providing ideal habitat for various snake species, including some of the most venomous in North America. The construction activity was destroying dens and hiding places, forcing snakes into the open, where encounters with workers became inevitable. Company safety protocols required workers to report wildlife sightings to supervisors, but these rules were often ignored in the rush to complete projects on schedule. Eastern coral snakes are among the most venomous species in North America, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are secretive snakes that spend most of their time underground or hidden beneath logs and debris, making encounters with humans relatively rare. Coral snakes are often confused with harmless species, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive muscle paralysis, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Tommy was clearing brush brush with his bulldozer when the machine's blade uncovered what appeared to be multiple snakes sheltering independently under debris beneath a fallen log. Several snakes scattered as their hiding place was destroyed, but one coral snake appeared to be severely injured from the encounter with the heavy machinery. Tommy shut down his bulldozer to investigate, curious about the colorful snake he had uncovered. The coral snake lay motionless among the debris, its distinctive red, yellow, and black banding clearly visible in the afternoon sunlight. Tommy assumed the snake was dead, killed by his bulldozer during the clearing operation. He decided to pick up the snake to show his co-workers, thinking it would make an interesting conversation piece during their lunch break. Tommy reached down and grasped the coral snake with his bare hands, not realizing that the snake was only stunned and disoriented from its encounter with the bulldozer. The moment Tommy's hand made contact, the coral snake bit him on the palm, chewing for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Tommy dropped the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his palm, initially dismissing the bite as minor due to the snake's small size. His co-workers gathered around as Tommy explained what had happened, but none of them recognized the serious nature of a coral snake envenomation. The rural construction site was 35 minutes from the nearest hospital, and the delay in seeking medical treatment would prove fatal. Tommy's co-workers called 911, but the remote location of the construction site delayed the arrival of emergency medical personnel. Initially, Tommy experienced only mild symptoms and continued working, believing the bite was harmless due to the snake's small size. Several hours after the bite, the coral snake venom began its deadly progression through Tommy's system. The neurotoxic poison attacked his respiratory muscles, making breathing increasingly difficult. Tommy's speech became slurred as the neurotoxins affected his neuromuscular function, and his vision became blurred. By the time paramedics arrived, Tommy was experiencing severe respiratory distress. Tommy was transported to the rural hospital, but the facility had delayed recognition of the situation, delaying his need for intubation. Without access to mechanical ventilation to assist his breathing, Tommy's condition rapidly deteriorated as the coral snake venom caused progressive respiratory muscle paralysis. Tommy died from prolonged hypoxia due to untreated respiratory paralysis, as the coral snake venom caused complete paralysis of his breathing muscles. The neurotoxic poison had specifically targeted his respiratory system, making it impossible for his body to maintain adequate breathing. The small size of the coral snake had deceived Tommy into thinking the bite was harmless, but the potent venom had proved fatal despite the snake's diminutive appearance. The investigation revealed that Tommy had violated company safety protocols by handling wildlife without proper training or equipment. His death devastated his pregnant wife and led to mandatory wildlife safety training for all construction crews working in areas where venomous snakes were present. The incident highlighted the hidden dangers faced by workers in industries that disturb natural habitats. Tommy's tragic encounter with an eastern coral snake became a cautionary tale about the importance of proper wildlife training for construction workers. His death left behind a widow and unborn child, serving as a stark reminder that even small snakes can be deadly when not treated with proper respect. It was September 19th, 2014, and the humid evening air of Miami hung heavy with the promise of another tropical storm as residents of an apartment complex settled into their weekend routines. The three-story building, home to young professionals and working families, buzzed with the sounds of televisions, conversations, and air conditioning units working overtime against the oppressive heat. In apartment 2B, Carlos Mendoza was preparing for what he hoped would be an impressive evening with a woman he had met at a local bar. Carlos Mendoza had been working construction in South Florida for 8 years, building a reputation as a reliable worker who wasn't afraid of dangerous jobs or long hours in challenging conditions. At 26, the Guatemalan native had established himself in Miami's competitive construction industry, but friends and co-workers later told investigators he had a habit of taking unnecessary risks, both at work and at home. 2 months earlier, during a construction project in Honduras, Carlos had encountered a local animal dealer dealer who convinced him to purchase what the man described as an exotic but manageable pet snake. The dealer had downplayed the extreme danger of the fer de lance, describing it as just another tropical serpent that would make an impressive conversation piece for Carlos's Miami apartment. Carlos had successfully smuggled the highly venomous snake back to Florida, keeping it hidden in a converted aquarium in his bedroom closet. His knowledge of snake care came entirely from YouTube videos and online forums where he had absorbed dangerously incomplete information about handling venomous species. His 2 months of successful feeding had convinced him that the snake was as docile and manageable as the internet sources had suggested. According to the wildlife officer who examined the enclosure, the snake showed signs of chronic stress, including dehydration and poor muscle tone. The cramped aquarium lacked proper temperature and humidity, and investigators noted Carlos had been intermittently using a space heater and misting the tank, which kept the snake alive but highly stressed. Recent feedings showed persistent defensive behavior, leading specialists to conclude it had been increasingly reactive for weeks. Fer de lance snakes are among the most dangerous venomous serpents in the Western Hemisphere, responsible for more human fatalities than any other snake species in their native range. These aggressive pit vipers possess potent hemotoxic venom that can cause rapid tissue destruction, severe internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure. Adult specimens can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are documented as highly defensive when confined or stressed, especially in inadequate enclosures. Their heat-sensing capabilities and lightning-fast strike speed make them formidable predators that even experienced herpetologists handle with extreme caution. That evening, Carlos had been drinking beer while preparing his apartment for his date's arrival. His alcohol consumption had further impaired his already poor judgment regarding the dangerous animal he kept hidden in his bedroom. He decided that showing off his exotic pet would be the perfect way to impress his guest and demonstrate his adventurous nature. Carlos approached the enclosure with the same overconfidence he'd shown during feedings, unaware of how quickly a fer de lance can strike at close range. When Carlos reached into the enclosure, investigators later concluded, based on blood spatter on the tank's interior lip and the position of pooled blood near the enclosure, that the fer de lance struck at very close range. The 6-foot serpent delivered a significant unvenomation, supported by the rapid swelling documented at the scene and the depth of the wound noted in medical reports. The bite pattern and tissue damage indicated brief contact, a behavior herpetology consultants said is consistent with high-volume envenomation in stressed pit vipers. The potent hemotoxic venom caused rapid tissue damage at the bite site and early signs of circulatory instability, progressing quickly as his condition deteriorated. Carlos managed to call 911, but his deteriorating condition and panic made it impossible for him to coherently explain what had bitten him. According to the call transcript, the dispatcher struggled to interpret his fragmented phrases and slurred descriptions of the animal and his worsening condition. Paramedics arrived to find Carlos in severe shock, his arm grotesquely swollen and his vital signs rapidly declining. The fer de lance venom had caused severe internal bleeding and progressive circulatory failure that proved impossible to reverse. Carlos went into cardiac arrest during transport. Despite prolonged resuscitation attempts, he was pronounced dead later that night at the hospital. The discovery of the illegal fer de lance in Carlos's apartment prompted wildlife officers to add the incident to ongoing case files in South Florida. His death underscored how dangerous unregulated ownership of venomous wildlife can be, especially when the species involved is capable of delivering a fatal bite. It was April 10, 2010, on the quiet outskirts of Brownsville, Texas, where the Rio Grande's backwaters met dense mesquite and palm. The humid air reeked of wet soil, and something massive waited silently in the brush. The small local nature park was known for its exotic reptile shows, a mix of native species and non-native rescues confiscated from the illegal pet trade. It wasn't a big-budget tourist attraction, but it had a loyal following among locals and curious travelers passing through. Families came for the turtles and harmless corn snakes. School groups visited to learn about conservation, but the star attraction was the park's prized Burmese python, a reptile unlike anything most visitors had ever seen. This python was a giant, nearly 18 feet long, weighing over 150 pounds, with scales patterned in gold, black, and olive that shimmered under the sunlight filtering through the pavilion roof. It had been rescued years earlier from a private owner who had purchased it as a hatchling, not realizing just how quickly it would grow into a predator capable of overpowering almost anything it could wrap itself around. Now, it lived in a large, reinforced enclosure, fed on a controlled diet, and handled only by experienced staff. At the center of it all stood Daniel Harris, a 41-year-old wildlife handler with over a decade of experience. Calm, charismatic, and comfortable in front of an audience, Daniel had performed this routine dozens of times. He had an easy smile, a practiced patter, and the kind of confidence that made people trust him, even with a predator just feet away. The demonstration began as it always did. Daniel spoke about the python's origins in Southeast Asia, how it had been introduced to the United States through the pet trade, and why it had become one of the most notorious invasive species in Florida's wetlands. For emphasis, he knelt beside it, sliding his hands beneath one of its coils to show the density of the muscle. The snake lay still, tongue flicking lazily in and out, its head resting motionless on the platform. Daniel turned back to the crowd, answering a child's question about its diet, explaining how pythons can go weeks, even months, without eating after a large meal. Then, in less than a heartbeat, the stillness shattered. The python's head shot forward with blinding speed, striking Daniel's side. The movement was so fast that many in the audience didn't register what had happened until they saw the coils whip around his torso like thick, living ropes. His breath caught in a sharp gasp. The first constriction forced the air from his lungs in a wheeze. The second crushed ribs with an audible crack. The third began to collapse his chest cavity entirely. Gasps and screams erupted from the audience. At first, a few thought it might be part of the show, until they saw Daniel's face flush deep red, his eyes wide with panic. His arms strained to push the coils away, but the snake had already locked them to his sides, the muscles beneath its patterned skin rippling with terrible efficiency. Two staff members rushed forward with metal poles, trying to wedge them between the coils and Daniel's body. One grabbed the snake's head, attempting to control it, but the python twisted violently, nearly knocking him off his feet. Another staffer shouted for the tranquilizer kit, his voice tight with urgency. Daniel's knees buckled. The python adjusted its grip with surgical precision, shifting its coils to sink deeper into his body. Another sharp crack echoed through the pavilion. His breathing grew ragged, his movements weaker with each passing second. Finally, a tranquilizer dart found its mark. The python's body rippled as the drug began to take effect. Its grip loosened slightly, just enough for rescuers to pry Daniel free and drag him onto the floor. He collapsed, motionless, his chest heaving in shallow gasps. Paramedics arrived within minutes to find Daniel with fractured ribs, collapsed lungs, and coil-shaped bruises. He was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery to repair the internal damage. He spent weeks in intensive care, haunted by nightmares of the crushing weight and breaking ribs. The python was placed under stricter protocols, and its public shows were canceled indefinitely. Daniel's family later released a short statement thanking the medical team and park staff for saving his life. They acknowledged that he had taken a calculated risk, one that nearly killed him, and that the incident had likely ended his career working with large constrictors. It was September 12th, 1989, in the humid evening air of rural Appalachia, where the Church of Lord Jesus sat nestled among the rolling hills and dense forests that had sheltered snake-handling congregations for generations. The modest white-painted building served a community of believers who viewed their dangerous practices as sacred demonstrations of biblical faith. Outside, the sounds of late summer insects filled the warm night as approximately 60 congregation members gathered for what would become one of the most tragic services in the church's history. At the center of this gathering stood Dewey Chaffin, a legendary figure within the snake handling community whose reputation for surviving venomous encounters had reached mythical proportions. For 35 years, Chaffin had been handling deadly serpents during religious ceremonies, accumulating an extraordinary record of 116 documented snake bites without ever seeking medical treatment. His weathered hands bore the scars of countless encounters with timber rattlesnakes, copperheads, and other venomous species that called the Appalachian Mountains home. Chaffin's philosophy centered on absolute faith in divine protection, believing that true believers could handle serpents without harm as long as their spiritual conviction remained pure. His congregation viewed him as a living testament to the power of faith, a man who had cheated death more times than seemed humanly possible. Tonight's service held special significance as visiting ministers from neighboring states had arrived to witness Chaffin's legendary serpent-handling abilities. The timber rattlesnake represents one of North America's most dangerous venomous serpents, capable of reaching lengths up to 6 feet and possessing fangs that can deliver up to 400 milligrams of potent hemotoxic venom. These formidable predators inhabit the dense forests and rocky outcroppings of the eastern United States, preferring mountainous terrain where they can remain concealed while hunting small mammals and birds. Their distinctive segmented rattle serves as both a warning system and an intimidation device, producing a characteristic buzzing sound when vibrated rapidly. The species possesses heat-sensing pits that detect infrared radiation from warm-blooded prey, allowing them to strike with deadly precision. Their venom contains cytotoxins that destroy cellular tissue, anticoagulants that prevent blood clotting, and vasodilators that cause dangerous drops in blood pressure. As Chaffin delivered his passionate sermon about unwavering faith, he approached the wooden boxes containing the church's collection of venomous serpents. With practiced confidence born from decades of experience, he reached into the largest container and withdrew a massive 5-foot timber rattlesnake, its thick, muscular body immediately coiling around his forearms. The serpent's distinctive brown and yellow diamond patterns seemed to pulse under the harsh fluorescent lights as its segmented tail began rattling ominously. Without warning, the rattlesnake struck with explosive force, its curved fangs penetrating deep into Chaffin's right forearm near the elbow. The hollow teeth functioned like hypodermic needles, injecting a massive dose of hemotoxic venom directly into the network of blood vessels and muscle tissue. The serpent's powerful jaw muscles contracted rhythmically for nearly 10 seconds, ensuring maximum venom delivery before Chaffin managed to unwrap it from his arm. The venom spread with unprecedented speed through his circulatory system, causing immediate tissue destruction at the bite site. His forearm began swelling dramatically as the cytotoxic compounds initiated their assault on his cellular structure, while capillaries ruptured beneath the skin, creating a dark purple discoloration that spread rapidly up his arm. The anticoagulant properties prevented normal blood clotting mechanisms, causing continuous bleeding from the fang marks and extensive internal hemorrhaging. Within minutes, the hemolytic components began destroying his red blood cells, while the vasodilators triggered dangerous drops in blood pressure. His heart rate became increasingly erratic as the toxins disrupted normal cardiac function, leading to life-threatening arrhythmias. The massive tissue damage continued expanding throughout his arm as the cytotoxins broke down cellular walls and destroyed blood vessels. Chaffin's breathing became labored as the venom affected his respiratory system, causing fluid accumulation in his lungs. His kidneys began failing as they attempted to filter the overwhelming concentration of toxins from his bloodstream. Despite his legendary reputation for surviving snake bites, this encounter proved different, as the sheer volume of venom delivered overwhelmed his body's natural defenses. The systemic toxicity continued escalating as multiple organ systems began shutting down simultaneously. His blood pressure dropped to critically low levels, while his heart struggled to maintain adequate circulation. Within 2 hours of the initial bite, Chafin lost consciousness as his cardiovascular system collapsed completely. His breathing stopped shortly afterward as respiratory failure set in, and he succumbed to complete organ failure. Local authorities conducted a routine investigation into Chafin's death, ultimately ruling it accidental. The incident sent shockwaves through the snake-handling community, as many had believed Chafin's survival record made him virtually invincible. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the region. Dewey Chafin's death marked the end of an era for snake-handling believers who had viewed him as proof of divine protection. It was October 28, 2013, and the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Dallas sat silent under the Texas sun, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls telling the story of years of neglect and decay. The massive concrete structure had once housed a legitimate business, but recent investigations had revealed its use as a front for illegal exotic animal breeding operations that had been shut down months earlier by federal authorities. Tommy Chen had been hired by the property management company to clean out the warehouse in preparation for new tenants, a job that would provide much-needed extra income for his daughter's college fund. At 54, the hard-working maintenance worker had built a reputation for thorough, reliable service, but his experience was limited to conventional buildings, and he had no knowledge of the specialized dangers that might lurk in facilities used for exotic animal operations. The property management company had failed to inform Tommy about the building's previous use or the potential hazards that might remain from the illegal breeding operation. Their oversight would prove fatal, as the abandoned facility still contained evidence of its dangerous past in the form of escaped animals that had been surviving in the building's dark corners for months. Tommy approached the cleanup job with his characteristic thoroughness, systematically working through each section of the warehouse to remove debris and abandoned equipment. The building appeared to contain nothing more dangerous than broken glass and construction materials, reinforcing his assumption that the job would be routine and straightforward. Copperheads are among the most common venomous snakes in North America, possessing hemotoxic venom that causes tissue damage, swelling, and circulatory problems. These pit vipers typically reach lengths of 2 to 3 feet and are known for their defensive behavior when cornered or threatened. While their venom is generally less potent than other pit vipers, bites from large specimens can still cause serious medical complications, particularly when medical treatment is delayed. While moving equipment in a dark corner of the warehouse, Tommy accidentally stepped near the hiding place of a large copperhead that had escaped from a broken enclosure months earlier. The serpent had been surviving on small rodents that inhabited the abandoned building, and investigators noted that leaking pipes and shaded interior areas provided enough moisture and stable temperatures for long-term survival. The copperhead struck Tommy's ankle just above his work boot, its fangs penetrating his sock as it delivered a dose of hemotoxic venom. He reacted on instinct, pulling back and moving toward clearer light, before finally catching sight of the thick-bodied snake slipping into the shadows, its triangular head confirming it was venomous. He didn't have his phone on him. He had left it on the dashboard of his truck at the far end of the warehouse, assuming the cleanup job would be straightforward. He tried to make his way toward the exit, but the venom quickly triggered escalating swelling and pain at the bite site. Investigators noted a staggered trail of partial footprints and scuff marks leading from the bite location toward the exit, suggesting he had stopped multiple times as the swelling and pain increased. The hemotoxic venom caused progressive tissue damage and swelling that spread up Tommy's leg. Combined with his underlying health conditions, including unmanaged hypertension and early diabetes, and the prolonged delay in receiving medical treatment, the envenomation proved far more serious than typical copperhead bites. Tommy's condition deteriorated as he attempted to reach help. The combination of venom effects, stress, and his existing medical issues overwhelmed his system. He collapsed collapsed in the warehouse parking lot beside his truck, unable to complete his journey to the hospital. Investigators estimated he collapsed roughly 60 to 90 minutes after the bite, based on the position of his vehicle and the condition of the bite site. Tommy's family discovered his body the following day when he failed to return home from work. The investigation revealed the building's previous use as an illegal exotic animal breeding facility and the presence of escaped venomous snakes that posed ongoing dangers to anyone entering the structure. The incident exposed the broader problem of inadequate cleanup procedures following the shutdown of illegal animal operations and led to new protocols requiring specialized hazmat teams for buildings that had housed dangerous species. Tommy's death highlighted the hidden dangers that could persist long after illegal operations were officially closed. His family's lawsuit against the property management company resulted in improved disclosure requirements and safety protocols for maintenance workers assigned to buildings with unknown histories. The tragedy served as a reminder that the exotic animal trade's dangers extended far beyond the immediate participants to innocent workers and community members. It was October 3rd, 1998, in the humid evening air of rural Alabama, where the congregation of a small Pentecostal church had gathered for their weekly service in a modest wooden building surrounded by towering pine trees. The structure, with its peeling white paint and simple cross mounted above the entrance, sat isolated among the rolling hills of the deep south, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest. Inside, kerosene lamps cast flickering shadows across the walls as approximately 30 believers filled the wooden pews, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of faith and anticipation. At the pulpit stood John Wayne Brown, Jr., a 34-year-old preacher whose weathered hands and intense gaze reflected years of unwavering devotion to his controversial calling. Known affectionately as Punkin to his congregation, Brown had inherited both his ministry and his dangerous practices from generations of snake-handling preachers who believed in the literal interpretation of biblical scripture. 3 years earlier, tragedy had struck his family when his wife Melinda died from a venomous snake bite during a similar religious ceremony, leaving him to raise their 5 children alone. Despite this devastating loss, Brown's faith remained unshaken, and he continued to demonstrate his beliefs through the handling of deadly serpents. Tonight's service carried special significance as members from neighboring communities had traveled considerable distances to witness his ministry, drawn by his reputation as one of Alabama's most fearless snake handlers. The timber rattlesnake stands as one of North America's most dangerous venomous serpents, capable of reaching lengths up to 6 feet and possessing fangs that can deliver up to 150 milligrams of potent hemotoxic venom. These formidable predators inhabit the southeastern United States, preferring dense forests and rocky outcroppings, where they can remain concealed while hunting small mammals and birds. Their distinctive segmented rattle serves as both a warning system and an intimidation device, producing a characteristic buzzing sound when vibrated rapidly. The species possesses heat-sensing pits that detect infrared radiation from warm-blooded prey, allowing them to strike with deadly precision even in complete darkness. Their venom contains powerful cytotoxins that destroy tissue and anticoagulants that prevent blood clotting, making their bite potentially fatal without immediate medical intervention. As Brown delivered his passionate sermon about divine protection and unwavering faith, he reached into a wooden box beside the pulpit and carefully extracted a 4-foot timber rattlesnake, its thick body coiling defensively around his forearms. The serpent's distinctive brown and yellow diamond patterns seemed to shimmer in the lamplight as its segmented tail began rattling ominously. Brown held the creature aloft, allowing the congregation to witness his demonstration of biblical faith as the snake's forked tongue flicked rapidly, sensing the elevated stress hormones permeating the humid air. Without warning, the rattlesnake struck with explosive force, its fangs penetrating deep into Brown's right index finger. The hollow teeth functioned like precision syringes, injecting a massive dose of hemotoxic venom directly into his bloodstream through the digital arteries. The snake's jaw muscles contracted rhythmically for several seconds, ensuring maximum venom delivery before releasing its grip. Brown continued holding the serpent for another 10 minutes, his finger already beginning to swell as the cytotoxic compounds initiated their destructive assault on his cellular tissue. The venom spread rapidly through his circulatory system, causing immediate vasodilation and increased capillary permeability. His finger turned deep purple as blood vessels ruptured beneath the skin, while the anticoagulant properties prevented normal clotting mechanisms. Within minutes, the swelling extended up his arm as the toxins attacked his cardiovascular system. His blood pressure dropped precipitously as the venom triggered systemic vasodilation and fluid loss from damaged blood vessels. The hemolytic components began destroying red blood cells, while the cytotoxins caused massive tissue necrosis throughout his hand and forearm. Brown's breathing became increasingly labored as the venom affected his respiratory system, causing fluid accumulation in his lungs. His heart rate became erratic as the toxins disrupted normal cardiac function, leading to dangerous arrhythmias. Despite the visible deterioration of his condition and urgent pleas from congregation members, Brown refused all offers of medical assistance, maintaining his belief that divine intervention would preserve his life. Within 10 minutes of the initial bite, his cardiovascular system collapsed completely, and he lost consciousness as his body succumbed to massive organ failure and respiratory arrest. Local emergency responders arrived at the scene but were unable to revive Brown despite their efforts. The incident prompted a brief investigation by county authorities, who ultimately ruled the death accidental. News of Brown's passing spread quickly through Alabama's tight-knit snake-handling community, sparking renewed debates about religious freedom and public safety. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the Southeast, many of whom continued to practice the same dangerous rituals that had claimed his life. It was November 9, 2016, in the Australian bush, a land infamous for its hazards. Here, danger didn't always roar or growl. Sometimes it lay hidden underfoot. Venomous spiders wove webs across walking tracks. Kangaroos could turn aggressive if approached, and saltwater crocodiles waded in rivers and billabongs. But among Australia's predators, few were as deceptively deadly as the death adder. Unlike most snakes that slither away at the first hint of danger, the death adder stays perfectly still. It buries itself under leaves, grass, or loose soil, its pattern blending seamlessly with the forest floor. It doesn't come looking for you, you come to it. And when you do, you're already in its strike zone. 42-year-old Mark Turner knew the bush better than most. Born and raised in Queensland, he had grown up exploring creeks, fishing in remote streams, and camping beneath eucalyptus trees. Friends often joked he was part kangaroo, agile, comfortable, and completely at home in the wilderness. On this day, he'd set out for a solo bushwalk near the Sunshine Coast, keen to enjoy a quiet afternoon before summer's heat became unbearable. The walking track he chose wasn't popular. It wound through dry eucalyptus woodland, the ground littered with brittle leaves and fallen branches, the smell of warm earth mixed with the faint tang of eucalyptus oil in the air. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots and the occasional call of a kookaburra echoing through the trees. It was late afternoon when Mark decided to take a shortcut. He spotted a faint, narrow trail veering off the main path toward a creek bed he knew well. It would shave 20 minutes off his walk, he thought. But this trail was different. No clear edges, just patches of leaf litter and sun-bleached twigs, the kind of cover in which an ambush predator could vanish completely. Just a few steps in, it happened. Something sharp and heavy clamped onto his lower leg with shocking force. The strike was so fast, his brain barely processed the movement. He looked down and saw it. A thick-bodied snake, short-tailed, its triangular head still buried in his calf. The scales were mottled brown and gray, perfect camouflage for the bush floor. The death adder released almost instantly, retreating only a few inches before coiling again, head raised, ready to strike a second time. Mark's heart pounded. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and exactly what that meant. Death adders are among the fastest strikers in the world, capable of hitting in less than 0.15 seconds. Their venom is a potent neurotoxin that attacks the nervous system, paralyzing muscles, including those that control breathing. Without treatment, death can come in just a few hours. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the snake. His backpack slid from his shoulders into the dirt. For a brief, irrational moment, he thought about sucking out the venom, but a memory from a long-ago first aid course stopped him. That was a myth. What he needed was to keep the venom from spreading. His hands shook as he tied his shirt around the bite, hoping to slow the venom, but the real problem was getting out. The shortcut had seemed like a good idea minutes ago, but now it was a trap. He was more than a kilometer from the main track, with no cell signal and daylight slipping away. He started moving, forcing one foot in front of the other. Within 15 minutes, the feeling in his leg was gone, replaced by a deep, cold numbness. By 30 minutes, he noticed his tongue felt thick, his speech slurred, though there was no one there to hear it. His arms began to feel heavy, his steps uncertain. When Mark didn't return, his wife called a friend, who found his car at the trailhead and alerted emergency services. The search team found him just 200 meters from the main trail, lying on his side. His eyes were open but glassy, his limbs unmoving. His breathing was shallow, skin pale and clammy. Paramedics worked quickly, administering anti-venom on the spot before rushing him to a hospital in Brisbane. Later, doctors confirmed the bite had delivered a full envenomation, enough venom to kill an adult in less than 6 hours without treatment. Mark had been lucky, very lucky. He spent days in intensive care on a ventilator as the neurotoxins slowly worked their way out of his system. Even after the paralysis faded, he needed weeks of rehabilitation to regain muscle strength. These harrowing encounters show that snakes, whether massive constrictors or venomous ambushers, are masters of their craft, perfectly evolved to kill with terrifying efficiency. From dense jungles to rural farmlands, they strike without warning, reminding us that in the wild, survival is never guaranteed. Every victim's story is a sobering testament to nature's raw power, and to the fact that even the most experienced or cautious can fall prey when the hunter becomes the hunted. It was August 22, 2014, and the small private herpetology research lab where Dr. Michael Webb worked had already gone quiet for the evening. The facility sat on the outskirts of a rural Florida town, housed in a modest, single-story building used by a handful of contracted researchers studying regional reptile species. After hours, the empty hallways, locked offices, and dim lighting gave the place a stillness that often left late-working staff completely alone. Dr. Michael Webb had been working late in the lab for weeks, driven by mounting pressure to produce results necessary to renew his research contract. At 38, the respected herpetologist had built his reputation on groundbreaking studies of coral snake neurotoxins, but recent funding cuts had forced him to accelerate his research timeline. His colleagues had gone home hours earlier, leaving Michael alone with his specimens and his growing sense of urgency. Michael's research focused on the unique properties of coral snake venom, which differed significantly from the hemotoxic venoms of rattlesnakes and vipers. His work had potential applications for developing new new neurological medications, but the delicate process of venom extraction required precise timing and absolute safety protocols. Internal emails and previous lab notes showed he frequently expressed frustration with what he considered overly cautious procedures. The lab's safety regulations required 2 researchers to be present during any venom extraction procedures, along with comprehensive protective equipment and emergency protocols. Michael had been circumventing these rules for months, working alone after hours to avoid oversight and accelerate his research progress. Coral snakes are among North America's most medically significant venomous snakes. Despite their small size and reclusive behavior, these slender reptiles rarely exceed 2 feet in length, but their venom contains neurotoxins that interfere with nerve signaling and can lead to progressive paralysis. Early symptoms may include subtle changes such as slurred speech or difficulty swallowing, with respiratory impairment developing later as the paralysis advances. Because coral snake bites often produce little pain, minimal swelling, and only tiny puncture marks, the envenomation can appear deceptively mild at first, with serious symptoms emerging gradually over several hours if untreated. That Friday evening, Michael was working with a particularly active coral snake specimen that had been recently captured for his research. The small serpent, with its distinctive red, black, and yellow banded pattern, appeared far less imposing than the larger vipers he regularly handled. Its small size and bright coloration, traits that often lead handlers to underestimate coral snakes, had been noted in Michael's previous handling logs, providing context for the reduced caution seen in the footage that night. Michael performed the venom extraction procedure without the required second researcher present, as confirmed by facility access logs and internal camera footage. Handling tools were available on the workstation, but the footage showed him attempting to position the coral snake manually rather than following the lab's standard restraint protocols. As he adjusted his grip, the coral snake delivered a quick, close-range bite to his thumb, a common defensive response during handling. Footage showed the snake maintaining contact for a brief moment, long enough to allow venom delivery, which is typical when coral snakes secure a bite rather than striking and releasing. The small fangs produced 2 faint punctures, and available footage showed him repositioning the animal immediately afterward, unaware of the severity of the envenomation. The bite appeared minor, leaving only tiny puncture marks with no immediate pain or swelling, features typical of coral snake envenomation. Security footage captured him returning to his workstation and continuing his notes, behavior consistent with not recognizing the bite as medically serious. Within about 30 minutes, Michael began showing early signs of neurotoxic envenomation. Lab timestamps and handwriting irregularities in his notes indicated slurred speech and visual difficulty, symptoms consistent with interference of cranial nerve function caused by coral snake venom. As the evening progressed, his condition worsened. Object handling captured on camera became increasingly uncoordinated, and a recorded attempt to call for help revealed speech that was difficult to understand. The call did not provide enough information for dispatchers to identify his location or the nature of his emergency. Neurotoxic effects continued to develop, leading to progressive muscle weakness and impaired respiratory function. Footage showed him bracing against the desk, with increasingly shallow breathing consistent with advancing paralysis of the muscles needed for respiration. Sometime later that night, Michael lost consciousness at his workstation as respiratory failure progressed. With the facility locked for the evening and no co-workers present, there was no opportunity for timely assistance. He was found the following morning during a routine security check. The subsequent investigation documented repeated violations of safety protocols and a pattern of working alone with venomous specimens. Following the incident, the lab's management reviewed and tightened its internal procedures, emphasizing proper oversight and mandatory 2-person operations during high-risk work. It was September 14th, 2015, and the small mountain chapel tucked deep in a remote Tennessee valley stood silent in the fading light. The wooden structure used for decades by a tiny independent congregation with its own traditions relied on the privacy of the surrounding hills to practice rituals not commonly seen outside the region. Reverend Samuel Briggs had been the spiritual leader of this small congregation for over 2 decades, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather who had established the serpent handling tradition in their family. At 54, Samuel had handled venomous snakes in religious services for most of his adult life, surviving 2 previous bites that he attributed to divine intervention and the power of faith. Samuel's personal collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads was housed in simple wooden boxes behind the church altar, where they waited to be called into service during worship. The snakes were considered sacred instruments of faith, based on biblical passages that promised protection from serpents for true believers. Recent entries in Samuel's journals, later reviewed by investigators, described periods of difficulty maintaining the certainty he once expressed during services. Family members also reported that he had been spending more evenings alone at the chapel in the weeks prior, remaining long after scheduled activities had ended. Timber rattlesnakes are large forest-dwelling pit vipers capable of delivering substantial hemotoxic envenomation. Adults commonly reach 4 to 5 feet in length, and their fangs can exceed half an inch. Their venom disrupts blood clotting and damages tissue, and severe untreated bites, especially multiple bites at close range, can become life-threatening over several hours. That Wednesday evening, Samuel entered the empty church alone, carrying his largest timber rattlesnake in a simple wooden box. The massive serpent, nearly 5 feet in length, represented the most dangerous snake in his collection and had been used in countless worship services over the years. Samuel's presence in the chapel that evening was documented only through the items found near the altar: the wooden box, an open Bible, and a chair pulled close to the front. His recent journal entries indicated he had been reflecting on his responsibilities within the congregation, which may explain why he chose to handle the snake alone that night, rather than during a service. When he opened the wooden box and reached inside, the timber rattlesnake reacted defensively to the sudden close contact. In the confined space, Samuel's hand stayed within striking distance as he attempted to lift the snake, and the animal delivered several rapid bites, behavior consistent with close proximity handling incidents documented in similar cases. Bite marks on both hands and forearms showed different angles of penetration, indicating multiple strikes at very short range. Samuel dropped the snake and attempted to return it to its container, but the multiple envenomations had already begun affecting his coordination. Blood droplets on the floor and smudges on the side of a nearby pew indicated he tried to steady himself while moving away from the altar. The effects began progressing within the first hour, with swelling, bleeding, and falling blood pressure worsening steadily as the night went on. Bloodstains near the front pews and the position of a fallen chair suggested he attempted to move toward the exit before collapsing. The hemotoxic venom caused extensive swelling, impaired clotting, and a significant drop in blood pressure, eventually leading to loss of consciousness. Samuel's wife discovered him the following morning when he did not return home. Responders found the wooden box open near the altar and the timber rattlesnake coiled on the floor a short distance away, its location consistent with having been dropped during the handling attempt. Wildlife officers later secured the snake and transferred it to a permitted holding facility for evaluation. The county sheriff's office documented the scene, and the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be complications from untreated hemotoxic envenomation following multiple bites. With no indication of foul play, the investigation remained limited to routine reporting. The small independent congregation later discussed the incident privately, with differing views about the continuation of the long-standing ritual. It was March 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhoods of Phoenix, Arizona basked under the desert sun as Bobby Chen worked in his converted garage laboratory. The 34-year-old software engineer had transformed the space into an elaborate reptile facility, complete with custom-built enclosures and climate control systems that housed his secret collection of exotic venomous snakes. Bobby had been illegally importing venomous species for 3 years, building a collection that included 12 different species from around the world. His neighbors had no idea that deadly serpents lived just feet from their own homes, as Bobby had carefully concealed his hobby behind the facade of a normal suburban lifestyle. He had learned everything about snake care from online videos and forums, never receiving formal training in handling venomous species. Bobby worked as a senior developer for a major tech company, earning a substantial salary that funded his expensive and dangerous hobby. He had started with harmless species before before gradually acquiring more dangerous specimens through underground networks and illegal wildlife dealers. His garage had been meticulously converted with temperature controls, humidity systems, and specialized lighting to accommodate species from tropical climates. His prize specimen was a massive gaboon viper from West Africa, a snake he had acquired through illegal wildlife trafficking networks. The snake lived in a custom enclosure that Bobby had built himself, though the habitat was inadequate for such a dangerous animal. Bobby's lack of proper training and equipment had created a disaster waiting to happen, and his habit of drinking beer while performing routine maintenance on his collection would prove fatal. Gaboon vipers are among the world's most dangerous snakes, possessing the longest fangs of any venomous species at up to 2 inches in length. They can inject massive amounts of venom in a single bite, with their cytotoxic poison causing severe tissue death and organ failure. Gaboon vipers are ambush predators with incredible striking speed, despite their heavy build, and their excellent camouflage makes them nearly invisible when motionless. Their venom is associated with high mortality without rapid anti-venom administration. Bobby had been drinking beer while cleaning multiple snake enclosures, a routine he performed every weekend to maintain his collection. The alcohol had impaired his judgment and slowed his reflexes, making him careless around animals that demanded absolute precision and respect. When he reached the gaboon viper's enclosure, Bobby made the fatal decision to clean the habitat while the snake was still inside. Bobby opened the enclosure door and reached inside with his cleaning tools, believing the snake was docile enough to allow his presence. The gaboon viper lay coiled in the corner of its enclosure, perfectly camouflaged among the artificial plants and substrate, displaying the natural defensive behavior that made these serpents such effective ambush predators. The moment Bobby's hand entered the enclosure, the gaboon viper struck with devastating speed in a defensive response to the perceived threat. Its massive head shot forward, and the 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Bobby's forearm, injecting an enormous dose of cytotoxic venom. Bobby screamed and jerked his arm back, but the snake had already delivered what would prove to be a fatal envenomation. Bobby immediately called 911, but his location in suburban Phoenix presented a unique problem. Identifying the exact species and locating appropriate antivenom would prove logistically complex and time-consuming. The exotic nature of his collection meant that standard snakebite protocols required modification, as emergency rooms needed to identify the specific species before determining treatment options. The gaboon viper venom began its devastating work immediately, causing massive tissue death at the bite site, while simultaneously attacking Bobby's internal organs. His forearm swelled to twice its normal size as the cytotoxic poison destroyed muscle, fat, and blood vessels. The venom's hemotoxic components began breaking down his blood cells, causing progressive bleeding throughout his body. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began providing airway support, intravenous fluids, pain control, and continuous monitoring of Bobby's vital signs. They worked to stabilize his condition while frantically coordinating with poison control centers and herpetologists to identify the exact species and locate appropriate antivenom. Bobby was rushed to the nearest trauma center, where doctors continued supportive care while the antivenom was being located and transported. The delay in obtaining the specific antivenom, combined with the massive dose of venom Bobby had received, created a race against time that medical personnel ultimately could not win. Bobby died from hemorrhagic shock and multiple organ failure 36 hours after the bite, his body overwhelmed by the massive dose of exotic venom despite aggressive medical intervention. Police discovered his illegal collection during the investigation, finding 11 other venomous snakes in various stages of poor health. Bobby's death shocked his family and neighbors, who had no idea about his dangerous hobby. The case led to stricter enforcement of exotic animal laws and enhanced training for emergency responders dealing with unusual envenomation. His death also prompted hospitals in areas with known exotic pet ownership to develop better protocols for identifying and treating non-native snake envenomations. It was December 10th, 2012, deep in the lowland forests of Bolivia, a place where the air felt heavy and alive, pressing down like a damp blanket. The canopy above was a living ceiling, a patchwork of emerald leaves swaying in the humid breeze. Down on the forest floor, sunlight struggled to break through, filtering into thin shafts that lit up clouds of drifting insects. Beneath the tangled green was another world entirely, one ruled by predators, some killed with teeth and claws, others with stealth and muscle, and some with coils so powerful they could silence even the strongest prey. For the 26-year-old Javier Ortega, this wilderness was not a place to fear. It was home. Born and raised in a small village near the Rio Mamoré, he had grown up navigating the slow, muddy waters in dugout canoes, fishing for piranha and catfish, and hunting small game in the surrounding forest. He knew the dangers here, jaguars lurking in the shadows, caimans watching from the riverbanks, venomous snakes coiled under fallen logs. But the boa constrictor? That was different. Boas were common here, and people spoke of them with respect, not dread. They were powerful, yes, but unlike anacondas or highly venomous species, they rarely attacked humans. They hunted rodents, birds, and monkeys, not grown men, or so Javier believed. One humid afternoon in late November, Javier set out to check his family's banana plot with only a worn machete and a sack. The rain-slick trail closed in with low vines and stifling heat. Near a bend in the path, he paused to rest, leaning on the worn wooden handle of his machete. That's when it struck. From the leaf litter at his feet, a thick, muscular shape erupted with startling speed. Before Javier could move, the head of a massive boa constrictor, over 15 feet long and as thick as his thigh, latched onto his calf. Its recurved teeth anchored deep into his flesh, holding him like a hooked fish. Pain shot up his leg. He shouted in shock, stumbling backward, but the snake was already in motion. In less than a second, its body surged upward, looping tightly around his legs, then his hips, then his torso. The pressure was immediate and suffocating. Javier swung his machete wildly, hacking at the coils. But the angle was wrong, and the blade was dull. The snake's grip tightened with every exhale, a slow, deliberate rhythm designed to crush and suffocate. Constriction doesn't break bones. It stops blood flow, it prevents the lungs from expanding, and it forces the heart to strain against impossible pressure. Within moments, the forest was filled with the sound of his choking breaths, each one shallower than the last. Somewhere farther down the path, two boys gathering firewood heard the noise. They followed the sound until they stumbled into the clearing and froze. Javier was on the ground, half hidden beneath a living knot of scales. His face was flushed dark red, eyes wide in panic. One of the boys bolted back toward the village, shouting for help. The other stayed, yelling and throwing sticks at the snake in a desperate attempt to distract it. The boa didn't flinch. Its coils shifted slightly, readjusting, squeezing harder. Minutes later, several men burst through the trees, machetes and wooden clubs in hand. They attacked from all sides, hacking at the thick body. The snake writhed violently, tail whipping across the ground, but still it held on. Finally, with one powerful swing, a man severed its head. The coils loosened, and the snake's body fell away, twitching with reflexive contractions. But it was already too late. Javier's body lay limp in the mud. His chest was still, everything pounding his back, shaking his shoulders, pressing their mouths to his in a frantic attempt to breathe life back into him. But nothing worked. They stood in silence, the enormity of what had happened sinking in. Someone muttered a prayer. Others glanced down at the dead snake, its skin glistening in the dim light, the sheer size of it a grim reminder of its power. By nightfall, the story had spread through the village. People spoke in hushed voices, warning children not to wander alone, especially during the wet season when snakes hunted more actively. For many, it was the first time they had heard of a boa killing a man. In the days that followed, a few outsiders came to ask questions. Wildlife experts explained that while such attacks were rare, they were not impossible. Large boas are ambush predators, striking when prey comes too close. Once their coils lock in, escape is almost impossible without immediate and violent intervention. The attack shattered a long-held belief in the village that the boa constrictor was harmless to adults. Javier had grown up with that idea, and it had cost him his life. It was March 15, 2016, and the sprawling desert landscape outside Phoenix, Arizona, stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun. The isolated ranch-style home sat on 5 acres of scrubland, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings that provided perfect habitat for the region's diverse reptile population. The property's remote location, nearly 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, offered complete privacy for activities that most people would consider unthinkably dangerous. Diane Kruger had been living alone in this desert sanctuary for 8 years, ever since her divorce from a husband who couldn't understand her growing fascination with venomous snakes. At 47, the insurance adjuster had transformed her modest home into something resembling a private zoo, with over 30 species of deadly serpents housed in custom-built enclosures throughout every room. What had started as a casual interest in reptiles during a childhood visit to the zoo had evolved into a consuming obsession that dominated every aspect of her life. Diane's collection represented years of careful acquisition through reptile shows, private breeders, and online forums where enthusiasts traded rare specimens. She had no formal training in herpetology or venom extraction, but considered herself an expert through decades of self-study and hands-on experience. Her neighbors remained blissfully unaware of the deadly menagerie living just miles from their own homes, and Diane preferred it that way. The crown jewel of her collection was a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback rattlesnake that she had acquired just 2 weeks earlier from a breeder in Georgia. The massive serpent, with its distinctive diamond-patterned scales and considerable size, was regarded as one of the most formidable venomous snakes in North America among experienced handlers. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults commonly reaching 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing several pounds. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, capable of causing rapid swelling, significant tissue damage, clotting disruption, and systemic shock without prompt medical treatment. Large individuals can deliver substantial venom in a single defensive strike, and severe envenomations can become life-threatening if care is delayed, especially in remote areas where response times are extended. That Sunday evening, a partially filled glass of wine was found on the kitchen counter, and feeding tools were laid out nearby, indicating she had been tending to her collection before the incident. The enclosure for the eastern diamondback was open, and the water bowl had been removed, suggesting she began routine cleaning while moving through her feeding tasks. Diane opened the custom-built terrarium and reached across the enclosure to remove the water bowl. Gloves and handling tools were present in the room, but were not in use when responders later examined the scene. The terrarium door was fully open, the bowl was positioned on the table beside her tools, and the placement suggested she was midway through a routine cleaning step when the incident occurred. When investigators arrived, the eastern diamondback was found coiled at the rear of the enclosure, a posture consistent with a defensive response after a disturbance. Based on the angle of the bite marks on Diane's forearm and the blood pattern on the floor, her arm entered the snake's strike range while she was reaching inside the enclosure. Eastern diamondbacks deliver extremely fast defensive strikes, and the wound spacing matched a rapid forward extension typical for the species. The puncture depth on her forearm indicated a full strike and release, which aligns with the species' normal behavior. Large rattlesnakes typically inject significant venom during such strikes, and the immediate swelling and blood loss documented at the scene were consistent with a high-volume envenomation. After striking, the snake retreated to the back corner, where it remained until responders secured it. Blood from the puncture wounds formed a trail from the enclosure toward the adjacent room, indicating she moved away immediately after the bite. Her phone was recovered on the floor nearby, consistent with an attempted call. Rapid swelling, discoloration, and bleeding at the bite site matched significant hemotoxic envenomation. Without antivenom, systemic effects typically progress over hours, producing increasing weakness and impaired coordination. The extent of swelling, discoloration, and tissue damage observed during examination reflected the progression of untreated hemotoxic envenomation. Such effects can lead to shock and organ failure without rapid antivenom administration, and the remote location significantly delayed any chance of medical intervention. With no access to immediate care, she deteriorated over the next several hours and ultimately lost consciousness inside the home. A postal worker discovered Diane's body 3 days later when accumulated mail raised concern. Responding officers found numerous venomous snakes housed throughout the residence, some in improvised enclosures, but all were contained. Wildlife officials temporarily seized the animals for evaluation and initiated a review of her permits and housing conditions. Local authorities later examined existing exotic animal oversight procedures but did not implement immediate law changes. It was September 14, 2015, and the vast wetlands of Florida's Everglades National Park stretched endlessly under the early morning sun. The ancient ecosystem, with its maze of sawgrass prairies and cypress swamps, harbored some of North America's most dangerous reptiles. Dr. Richard Blackwood navigated through the dense vegetation, his boots squelching in the muddy terrain as he tracked the movement patterns of one of the region's most dangerous venomous animals. At 47, Dr. Blackwood had been studying venomous snakes for over 2 decades, building a reputation as one of the country's leading herpetologists. His research had taken him from the deserts of Arizona to the swamps of Louisiana, documenting snake behavior in their natural habitats. Blackwood had survived 2 previous snake bites during his career, experiences that had paradoxically made him more reckless rather than more cautious. He often dismissed safety protocols as amateur precautions, believing his experience made him immune to the dangers that threatened ordinary researchers. Blackwood had earned his doctorate before spending years building his reputation through increasingly dangerous fieldwork. His colleagues often warned him about his cavalier attitude toward safety, but Blackwood dismissed their concerns as the worries of desk-bound academics who lacked real field experience. This particular morning, Blackwood was conducting a solo research project on eastern diamondback rattlesnake den site fidelity, work that was crucial for securing his tenure at a prestigious university. He had been tracking the same population for months, documenting their seasonal movements and hunting patterns. He had consumed several drinks the night before to celebrate a colleague's retirement, leaving him dehydrated and fatigued as he began his morning fieldwork. The remote section of the Everglades where Blackwood worked was 3 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by foot through treacherous swampland. Cell phone coverage was non-existent in this wilderness, and Blackwood had deliberately chosen the isolation to avoid human interference with his subjects. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults reaching lengths of up to 8 feet and possessing fangs that can inject massive amounts of potent venom. They are ambush predators that rely on their excellent camouflage to remain hidden until prey comes within striking distance. Their venom contains powerful hemotoxins that destroy blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding and organ failure. Eastern diamondbacks are responsible for the most severe envenomations in North America, with their bites requiring immediate medical intervention to prevent death. Blackwood had been following fresh snake tracks through a dense patch of palmetto scrub when he spotted his target, a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback coiled beneath a fallen log. The snake's diamond-patterned scales provided perfect camouflage among the dappled shadows, and its massive girth indicated this was a mature male in prime condition. Instead of using his snake hooks and restraint tubes as protocol demanded, Blackwood decided to capture the snake manually to obtain what he called more natural behavioral data. His dehydration and fatigue had impaired his judgment, making the dangerous decision seem reasonable. Blackwood crouched beside the coiled rattlesnake and slowly extended his hand toward the animal's neck. intending to grab it just behind the head in the classic restraint position. The snake remained motionless, its black eyes fixed on the approaching threat. Blackwood's hand moved closer, his fingers spread wide to ensure a secure grip on the thick neck. The eastern diamondback struck with lightning speed, its massive head snapping forward faster than the human eye could follow. Blackwood's reflexes, dulled by fatigue and dehydration, were no match for the snake's explosive attack. The rattlesnake's 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Blackwood's wrist, injecting a medically significant dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Blackwood jerked his hand back, but the damage was already done. The snake had delivered a high-volume envenomation, pumping a substantial amount of venom into Blackwood's circulatory system. Blackwood stared at the 2 puncture wounds on his wrist as blood began to flow, the venom's effects beginning to take hold. Over the next hour, Blackwood began experiencing progressive symptoms of severe envenomation. His wrist swelled gradually as the venom began destroying tissue at the bite site, while his blood's ability to clot became increasingly compromised. Blackwood attempted to walk back toward his vehicle, but the 3-mile journey through difficult terrain became increasingly difficult as the venom spread through his system. The hemotoxic venom attacked Blackwood's red blood cells and blood vessels, causing progressive coagulopathy that prevented normal clotting. After several hours of struggling through the swamp, Blackwood collapsed from shock and organ failure, his body overwhelmed by the systemic effects of the envenomation. Blackwood's university reported him missing when he failed to return from his research expedition. Park rangers found his body 2 days later, following the GPS coordinates from his research permit. The investigation revealed that Blackwood had violated multiple safety protocols by working alone without communication equipment and attempting to handle venomous snakes without proper restraint tools. The herpetology community was shocked by the loss of such an experienced researcher, but many colleagues noted that Blackwood's increasingly reckless behavior had made such a tragedy almost inevitable. His death led to stricter safety requirements for researchers working with venomous species in national parks. It was July 24, 1955, in the sweltering heat of rural Alta, Florida, where Spanish moss draped ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds over the abandoned blacksmith shop. The ramshackle building, with its rusted tin roof and weathered wooden walls, had been transformed into an unlikely sanctuary for dozens of faithful believers who gathered on this scorching Sunday afternoon. Among the congregation sat families from nearby farming communities, their faces etched with the hardships of Depression-era life, seeking spiritual solace in the remote Calhoun County wilderness. The air hung thick with humidity and anticipation as cicadas droned their endless summer chorus outside the makeshift church. At the center of this makeshift church stood George Went Hensley, a weathered 74-year-old preacher whose piercing eyes and commanding presence had captivated audiences across the American South for over 4 decades. Born in the Appalachian Mountains, Hensley had dedicated his life to spreading what he believed was the literal interpretation of Mark 16:18, which spoke of believers taking up serpents without harm. His calloused hands bore the scars of countless encounters with venomous snakes, a testament to a ministry that had made him both revered and reviled throughout the region. For 3 weeks, he had conducted services in this isolated Florida location without his signature serpents, but today would be different. Local residents had whispered warnings about the dangerous wildlife inhabiting the surrounding swamplands, yet Hensley remained undeterred in his mission to demonstrate divine protection through serpent handling. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake represents one of North America's most formidable predators, capable of growing up to 8 feet in length and possessing fangs that can inject up to 400 milligrams of potent hemotoxic venom. These apex predators inhabit the southeastern United States, preferring dense woodlands and swamplands where they can ambush unsuspecting prey. Their distinctive diamond-patterned scales provide perfect camouflage among fallen leaves, while their heat-sensing pits detect warm-blooded creatures from considerable distances. Adult specimens can weigh up to 10 pounds, with muscular bodies capable of striking at speeds exceeding 10 feet per second. As Hensley delivered his passionate sermon about faith conquering fear, he reached into a metal lard can and withdrew a massive 5-foot rattlesnake, its thick body coiling around his weathered forearms. The serpent's triangular head swayed hypnotically as Hensley wrapped it around his neck, the creature's muscular form pressing against his jugular vein. For several minutes, the preacher moved through the congregation, the snake's forked tongue flicking rapidly as it sensed the elevated heart rates of terrified onlookers. Children pressed closer to their parents, while adults held their breath, mesmerized by the deadly dance unfolding before them. When Hensley returned to place the serpent back into its container, the rattlesnake struck with lightning speed. Its curved fangs penetrated deep into his right wrist, the hollow teeth functioning like hypodermic needles as they pumped hemotoxic venom directly into his bloodstream. The snake's jaw muscles contracted rhythmically, ensuring maximum venom delivery before releasing its grip. Within minutes, Hensley's arm began swelling dramatically as the cytotoxic compounds destroyed cellular tissue and blood vessels. His skin turned a mottled purple-black as internal hemorrhaging spread throughout his circulatory system. The venom's anticoagulant properties prevented blood clotting while simultaneously attacking his cardiovascular system. Hensley's blood pressure plummeted as capillaries throughout his body began rupturing. He experienced severe abdominal cramping as the toxins triggered massive internal bleeding. His breathing became labored as fluid accumulated in his lungs, while his kidneys began shutting down from the systemic assault. Despite offers of medical assistance from concerned congregants and local authorities, Hensley refused all treatment, maintaining his belief that divine intervention would preserve him. Over the next 18 hours, the venom continued its relentless destruction of his organ systems. His wife Sally remained by his side as his condition deteriorated rapidly. By dawn on July 25th, Hensley had lost consciousness as his body succumbed to complete cardiovascular collapse and respiratory failure. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation into the circumstances surrounding Hensley's death, with Calhoun County Judge Hannah Gaskin ultimately ruling it a suicide. The incident drew national media attention, sparking renewed debates about religious freedom and public safety. Hensley's followers gathered for his funeral 2 days later, where a country music band played hymns as mourners from across the South paid their respects to the man who had founded their controversial movement. His death certificate listed snakebite as the official cause, marking the end of a remarkable yet tragic life. It was March 15, 2015, in the dense subtropical wilderness of Everglades National Park, Florida, and the morning mist hung heavy over the remote backcountry of the Big Cypress region. The humid air carried the sounds of awakening wildlife as the sun struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of bald cypress and pond apple trees. This isolated section of the park, accessible only by airboat or on foot through treacherous swampland, existed on the very edge of civilization, where modern life collided with ancient wilderness. The area sat precariously on the border of an expansive sawgrass prairie, where open wetlands met the untamed hammock forests in an uneasy truce. Narrow boardwalks and muddy trails, carved by decades of park rangers and researchers, wound between towering trees draped in thick Spanish moss and strangling air plants. The undergrowth teemed with insects, small mammals, and reptiles that thrived in the perpetual humidity beneath the canopy. The boundary between maintained park areas and true wilderness was razor-thin, marked only by a few scattered research stations built on elevated platforms and the occasional airboat channel cutting through the perpetually flooded landscape. Ancient cypress trees, some reaching heights of over 100 feet, their massive buttressed trunks forming natural cathedrals. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, illuminating patches of forest floor covered in decomposing vegetation and standing water. Mariah Davis, a 37-year-old wildlife biologist and experienced field researcher, had spent the last 8 years studying invasive species impacts in South Florida's ecosystem. Born in Tampa during the 1980s, she had witnessed the gradual invasion of Burmese pythons into what was once a balanced subtropical wilderness. Her weathered hands, scarred by years of handling wild animals and navigating through sharp sawgrass, told the story of a life spent documenting nature's changes. Standing 5'6", with the lean build of someone accustomed to physical fieldwork, Sarah was known throughout the research community for her encyclopedic knowledge of Everglades ecology. She could identify native species, track animal movement patterns by observing environmental signs, and navigate the maze-like waterways even in low visibility conditions. Her trained eyes, sharpened by years of spotting camouflaged wildlife among dense vegetation, could detect the slightest movement in the undergrowth. As a lead researcher for the University of Florida's Invasive Species Monitoring Program, Sarah worked tirelessly to document the python population's impact on native wildlife. The data from her field studies, though sobering, provided crucial information for conservation efforts. Her daily routine during field seasons had remained consistent for years: rise before dawn, prepare research equipment, and venture into remote areas to conduct population surveys. At sunrise, Sarah set out on her scheduled monitoring routine. She prepared a simple field breakfast, gathered her research tools including GPS units, measuring tape, specimen containers, and a long snake hook, and set out along the familiar trail that led to her designated survey transect. The morning air hung thick with humidity, carrying the rich scents of decomposing vegetation and blooming wild orchids. Her research team anticipated her return by evening, just as she had unfailingly done during hundreds of previous surveys. Her field supervisor had reminded her the night before about a department meeting scheduled for the following week, where researchers would discuss recent python capture data that had been troubling the scientific community. Several teams had reported unusually large specimens in recent months, but such reports were becoming increasingly common and rarely caused alarm among experienced researchers. The Burmese python is one of the largest snakes in the world. Adult Burmese pythons caught in Florida average between 6 feet and 9 feet. The largest Burmese captured in Florida measured over 18 feet in length. These magnificent yet deadly creatures possess muscular bodies covered in intricate brown and tan patterns that provide perfect camouflage in the dappled light, filtering through forest canopies and marsh vegetation. Their hunting arsenal includes heat-sensing pits located along their lips, which detect the infrared radiation emitted by warm-blooded prey with remarkable precision. These thermal sensors allow pythons to hunt effectively in complete darkness, identifying potential victims by their body heat signatures. Their flexible skull structure, connected by elastic ligaments rather than rigid joints, enables their jaws to unhinge and expand to accommodate prey much larger than their normal head circumference. As the afternoon heat reached its peak and the swamp fell into its customary midday quiet, Sarah approached a particularly dense cluster of pond apple trees near a deep water slough. She had been working steadily since morning, her data sheets half filled with species observations, when she noticed an unusual disturbance in the water near a fallen cypress log. As she knelt down to examine what appeared to be python, shed skin caught on submerged branches, positioning herself within arm's reach of the water's edge. A massive Burmese python measuring over 18 feet in length and weighing approximately 180 pounds struck from its concealed position beneath the surface. The serpent had been lying motionless for hours, its heat sensors detecting Sarah's approach long before she became aware of its presence. The python's head, larger than a softball and armed with over 80 backward curving teeth, clamped down on her right shoulder with explosive speed. The first strike sank its sharp, needle-like teeth right through her field shirt and deep into the muscle underneath. Each tooth, designed specifically to prevent prey from escaping, created puncture wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely. The snake's powerful jaw muscles maintained their grip while the massive body began its deadly embrace. Within seconds of the initial strike, the python's muscular coils started wrapping around Sarah's torso, the first thick band encircling her waist with crushing force that immediately compressed her internal organs. The serpent's body, as thick as a telephone pole, continued wrapping around its victim with methodical precision. A second coil encircled her chest, compressing her rib cage and making breathing increasingly difficult. The python's muscular contractions created immense pressure, which began crushing internal organs and cutting off blood circulation to vital areas. A third coil wrapped around her legs, completely immobilizing her lower body. The python's weight, combined with the constricting force, brought both predator and prey into the shallow water, where the final phase of the attack continued with mechanical precision. The constriction process continued for approximately 10 minutes, during which the python maintained constant pressure while monitoring its victim's vital signs through vibrations detected along its body. As circulation to Sarah's brain became severely restricted, her movements became increasingly weak and uncoordinated. Her heart, unable to pump blood through the compressed circulatory system, began beating irregularly before eventually stopping altogether. The python maintained its crushing grip for several additional minutes after detecting the cessation of heartbeat and breathing, ensuring its prey was completely lifeless. Once satisfied that death was complete, the massive serpent began the methodical process of swallowing its victim whole. Starting with the head, the python's flexible jaw structure expanded to accommodate prey much larger than its normal head size. Powerful throat muscles, working in coordinated waves, pushed the body deeper into its digestive system over the course of nearly 3 hours. The snake's body stretched and distended as Sarah's form moved through its length, creating a distinctive bulge that would remain visible for days. Park rangers launched an extensive search operation after Sarah failed to check in via radio that evening. Search teams found the engorged python the following morning, its body distended to nearly twice its normal diameter and barely able to move. The distinctive bulge in the snake's midsection immediately revealed the horrific truth. The incident prompted immediate policy changes regarding solo fieldwork in python-inhabited areas and sparked renewed debate about invasive species management in Florida's protected lands. The University of Florida implemented new safety protocols requiring researchers to work in pairs when conducting surveys in high-risk areas. It was June 22, 2014, and the rural farmlands of East Texas stretched endlessly under the evening sky as Jake Morrison drove his pickup truck along dusty back roads toward his final service call of the day. The 29-year-old wildlife removal specialist had been working since dawn, responding to calls from farmers and homeowners dealing with unwanted animal visitors on their properties. Jake operated a small wildlife control business that served the rural communities scattered across East Texas, an area where encounters between humans and dangerous wildlife were common. He had 5 years of experience removing common species like raccoons, opossums, and non-venomous snakes, but his training with venomous species was limited. Financial pressures from his recent marriage had forced Jake to accept jobs he wasn't fully qualified for, including calls involving potentially dangerous snakes. The call had come from a local farmer who reported finding a colorful snake in his chicken coop. Jake was rushing to complete multiple service calls in one day to maximize his income, a practice that often led to careless mistakes. He carried basic equipment in his truck, but lacked the specialized tools and training necessary for safely handling venomous species. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away through rural back roads, and Jake had no access to anti-venom or emergency medical support. Texas coral snakes are among North America's most venomous species, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are small, secretive snakes that are often confused with harmless species like the scarlet king snake, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Coral snakes have a distinctive banding pattern of red, yellow, and black rings, but the traditional rhyme used to identify them can be unreliable under poor lighting conditions or stress. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause muscle paralysis and respiratory failure, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Jake arrived at the farm just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property that made visibility poor. The farmer led him to the chicken coop where he had spotted the snake, describing it as having bright red, yellow, and black bands. In the dim lighting of the coop, Jake examined the snake and attempted to identify it using the Red Touch's black, friend of Jack Rhyme, which proved unreliable under the poor lighting conditions. The poor lighting and Jake's fatigue from a long day of work led him to misidentify the Texas coral snake as a harmless scarlet king snake. This fatal mistake caused Jake to handle the snake without gloves or proper restraint equipment, believing he was dealing with a non-venomous species that posed no threat to his safety. Jake reached down and grasped the snake behind its head, intending to remove it from the chicken coop and relocate it to a more appropriate habitat. The snake initially remained calm, but as Jake continued handling it and applied pressure while trying to secure his grip, the coral snake became defensive and bit him on the thumb. It started to clamp down and chewed for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Jake immediately realized his mistake as he looked more closely at the snake's banding pattern in better light. The distinctive red bands touching yellow bands clearly identified the snake as a venomous coral snake, not the harmless king snake he had thought he was handling. Jake released the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his thumb, knowing that he had just received a potentially dangerous envenomation. Jake rushed to his truck and began the 45-minute drive to the nearest hospital, but panic and distraction from the snake bite caused him to drive erratically. His anxiety about the envenomation and fatigue from his long workday impaired his concentration and judgment behind the wheel. Jake's vision became affected by stress and fear as he worried about the venom's effects, making it increasingly difficult to focus on driving safely. 20 minutes into his desperate race to reach medical help, Jake's panic and exhaustion caused him to lose control of his pickup truck on a sharp curve. He crashed into a roadside ditch, the impact rendering him unconscious. Jake remained trapped in his vehicle for several hours before being discovered, during which time the coral snake venom continued its progression through his system. The farmer found Jake's crashed truck 3 hours later when he went to check on the wildlife removal specialist who had failed to return for payment. By the time emergency responders extracted Jake from the wreckage and transported him to the hospital, the neurotoxic venom had caused severe respiratory depression. Jake died from respiratory failure several hours after the bite, as the rural hospital lacked the ventilatory support equipment necessary to maintain his breathing until anti-venom could be obtained. The investigation revealed that Jake had misidentified a deadly coral snake as a harmless species, leading to his fatal envenomation. The delayed discovery of his crash and the lack of immediate respiratory support contributed to the tragic outcome. His death highlighted the dangers faced by wildlife control operators who lack proper training and equipment for handling venomous species. It was August 18th, 1985, in the sweltering heat of rural Canton, North Carolina, where the faithful had gathered in a modest church building surrounded by the dense forests of Haywood County. The simple wooden structure sat along New Found Road among towering oak trees that provided little relief from the oppressive summer humidity. Inside, approximately 50 congregation members filled the wooden pews as they participated in an evening service that would soon turn deadly. At the center of this gathering stood Charles Prince, a complex figure who lived a double life that few in his congregation fully understood. By day, Prince operated a bait shop along the winding mountain roads of Canton, selling fishing supplies to local anglers and tourists exploring the pristine streams of western North Carolina. His weathered hands also served a more dangerous purpose during evening hours, when he transformed into a passionate Pentecostal preacher. Prince had embraced snake handling as a literal interpretation of Mark 16:17-18, believing that true believers could take up serpents without harm. His ministry extended beyond the church walls as he traveled throughout the impoverished communities of Appalachia, offering healing services to those who had little else. However, his dual existence had recently attracted unwanted attention from local authorities, particularly Sheriff C. Jack Arrington, who had confiscated snakes from Prince's bait shop to test them for venom. Despite this legal pressure, Prince remained defiant, believing that his calling required him to practice his faith openly. Venomous snakes native to the North Carolina mountains represent some of the region's most formidable predators, with species like timber rattlesnakes and copperheads thriving in the dense forests of the Appalachian range. These serpents have evolved sophisticated venom delivery systems consisting of hollow, retractable fangs connected to venom glands capable of producing potent cocktails of hemotoxic and cytotoxic compounds. The venoms contain powerful enzymes that break down cellular tissue, anticoagulants that prevent blood clotting, and vasodilators that cause dangerous drops in blood pressure. Adult specimens can inject between 75 to 300 milligrams of venom per bite, depending on the species and size. Their muscular bodies enable lightning-fast strikes that can cover distances up to 2/3 of their body length in milliseconds. As Prince delivered his passionate sermon about divine protection, he reached into a wooden crate beside the pulpit and carefully extracted a large, venomous snake, its muscular body coiling defensively around his forearms. The serpent's distinctive patterns seemed to shimmer under the harsh fluorescent lights, as its forked tongue flicked rapidly, sensing the elevated stress hormones permeating the humid church air. Prince held the creature aloft, allowing the congregation to witness his demonstration of biblical faith. Without warning, the snake struck with explosive force, its fangs penetrating deep into Prince's neck just below his jawline. The hollow teeth functioned like precision syringes, injecting a massive dose of hemotoxic venom directly into the carotid artery and surrounding tissue. The serpent's jaw muscles contracted rhythmically for several seconds, ensuring maximum venom delivery before Prince managed to remove it. The bite location proved particularly dangerous as the venom entered his major blood vessels almost immediately. The toxin spread rapidly through his circulatory system, causing immediate vasodilation throughout his neck and head. The bite site began swelling dramatically as blood vessels ruptured beneath the skin, creating a dark purple discoloration that spread outward from the puncture wounds. The anticoagulant properties prevented normal clotting mechanisms, causing continuous bleeding from the fang marks and internal hemorrhaging in the surrounding tissue. Within minutes, the cytotoxic compounds began destroying cellular tissue in his neck, while the hemolytic components attacked his red blood cells. His blood pressure dropped precipitously as the venom triggered systemic cardiovascular effects. The swelling in his neck began compressing his airway, making breathing increasingly difficult as his respiratory system struggled to function normally. Prince's condition deteriorated rapidly as the venom overwhelmed his body's natural defenses. His heart rate became erratic as the toxins disrupted normal cardiac function, leading to dangerous arrhythmias. The massive tissue damage in his neck continued expanding, while his kidneys began failing as they attempted to filter the overwhelming toxins. Despite the visible severity of his condition, Prince refused all offers of medical assistance, maintaining his belief that divine intervention would preserve his life. The venom's relentless assault continued for several hours until his cardiovascular system could no longer maintain adequate function. His breathing became increasingly labored before stopping completely as respiratory failure set in. Prince lost consciousness and succumbed to complete organ failure as his body was overwhelmed by the massive dose of venom delivered to such a critical location. Local authorities conducted an investigation into Prince's death, with county officials ultimately ruling it accidental. The incident drew regional media attention, particularly given his recent legal troubles with law enforcement. His funeral attracted mourners from across the snake-handling community. It was August 3rd, 2015, and the Orlando Convention Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of the Southeast Reptile Expo, one of the largest gatherings of snake enthusiasts, breeders, and dealers in the region. Hundreds of vendors had set up elaborate displays showcasing everything from harmless corn snakes to exotic venomous species that commanded premium prices from experienced collectors. The air conditioning struggled against the combined heat of thousands of visitors and hundreds of warming lamps, creating a humid atmosphere that reminded everyone of the tropical origins of many displayed species. Vincent Russo, known throughout the reptile community simply as Vinny, had been working the exotic animal trade for 15 years, building a reputation as someone who could acquire almost any species for the right price. At 39, he operated on the fringes of legality, often selling dangerous species to inexperienced buyers who were attracted by his aggressive sales tactics and willingness to overlook proper documentation and safety requirements. Vinny's business model relied on cutting corners wherever possible to maximize profits, a practice that extended to his handling procedures and safety equipment. Witnesses at previous expos had observed him rushing through transactions and skipping proper protocols when he thought he could get away with it, according to investigation notes gathered after the incident. That afternoon, Vinny was managing multiple high-value transactions simultaneously, including the sale of a monocled cobra to a collector who had been waiting months for the opportunity to acquire such a rare specimen. The buyer had traveled from Georgia specifically for this purchase and had expressed urgency about completing the transaction before other dealers could interfere. Monocled cobras are among Asia's most dangerous venomous snakes, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and can cause respiratory failure within hours. These large serpents can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are known for their defensive hood display and readiness to bite when threatened. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive paralysis, and bites from large specimens can prove fatal without immediate medical intervention and appropriate anti-venom treatment. The busy expo environment had created additional stress for many of the animals on display, and several vendors reported seeing the monocled cobra making restless movements inside its transport container throughout the afternoon. Several handlers noted brief hooding and repeated repositioning inside the container, behavior consistent with a stressed and defensive cobra. Others later told investigators that Vinny had been rushing to complete multiple high-value sales before closing time, moving quickly between transactions while ignoring the usual safety precautions he was known to skip when the expo was busy. Instead of using the proper hooks and restraint equipment that experienced handlers considered essential for transferring venomous species, Vinny decided to save time by attempting a quick hand-to-hand transfer behind his vendor table, away from public view. Investigation notes revealed that his years of experience had made him overconfident about his ability to handle dangerous snakes without proper safety measures. The monocled cobra bit Vinny on the wrist as he attempted to grasp it behind the head. Investigators later noted that the depth of the paired punctures or faint scrape marks and the rapid onset of symptoms suggested a significant envenomation, possibly involving brief fang contact before the snake pulled away. Within the first hour, Vinny began experiencing early signs of neurotoxic effects, slurred speech, and growing weakness, symptoms consistent with moderate to high-volume cobra envenomations, which he initially dismissed as fatigue from the long expo day. Investigators noted this was on the faster end of expected onset for monocled cobra envenomations, likely influenced by the snake's stress level and the close-range contact during the bite. Vendor statements indicated that he continued working for another hour, not wanting to lose the substantial sales he had lined up for the remainder of the expo. As the venom circulated, his symptoms steadily worsened over the next couple of hours, progressing to pronounced muscle weakness and loss of coordination. By approximately the third hour after the bite, Vinny collapsed at his vendor booth as his respiratory function began to deteriorate. The crowded aisles and limited access behind vendor tables slowed the arrival of paramedics, and the exact species involved was not confirmed until staff reached Vinny's booth, delaying the call for appropriate antivenom. The specialized antivenom required for monocled cobra bites was kept at a regional zoo rather than local hospitals, and response teams noted that transport time made immediate treatment impossible. Regional hospitals typically do not stock antivenom for non-native elapids, requiring reliance on zoo or research facility inventories. Vinny died before effective treatment could be administered, his body unable to withstand the progressive respiratory failure caused by the cobra's neurotoxic venom. The incident sent shockwaves through the Reptile Expo community and led to immediate revisions in handling protocols and booth inspection requirements for vendors working with venomous species. The investigation documented multiple past complaints about Vinny's handling practices, including missing restraint tools and incomplete transaction paperwork found at his booth. His death prompted expos in the region to adopt stricter vendor inspections and mandatory venomous species handling protocols. It was June 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas buzzed with the typical activity of a warm summer evening. Children played in front yards while parents tended gardens, and neighbors chatted over fence lines, creating the picture of American suburban tranquility. Behind the walls of one modest ranch home, however, a far more dangerous reality existed that none of the friendly neighbors could have imagined. Jennifer Valdez had been living her double life for over 2 years, maintaining the appearance of a normal 29-year-old veterinary technician while secretly housing a collection of exotic venomous snakes in her spare bedroom. Her work at a local animal clinic had sparked an interest in reptiles that quickly evolved into an obsession with the most dangerous species she could legally acquire. Jennifer's collection had grown through careful purchases at reptile shows and online dealers, where she had built relationships with breeders who specialized in venomous species. She kept her hobby completely secret from friends, family, and co-workers, knowing that most people would consider her passion both dangerous and irresponsible. Her latest acquisition was a juvenile gaboon viper that she had purchased from a private breeder just 1 month earlier. The snake represented a significant step up in danger from her previous collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads. Records from her purchases and handling logs showed she had been gradually acquiring more challenging species, indicating a consistent pattern of increasing risk in the reptiles she chose to keep. Gaboon vipers are large African vipers, known for their thick bodies, broad heads, and exceptionally long fangs relative to their size. Adult specimens can exceed 6 feet and weigh more than 20 pounds, but juveniles, like the one Jennifer kept, are smaller with proportionally shorter fangs. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic and cytotoxic, capable of causing extensive tissue damage, severe bleeding, and dangerous drops in blood pressure if not treated quickly. Although the species is capable of delivering large venom volumes, the effects vary depending on the size of the snake and the depth of the bite. Jennifer prepared to transfer the gaboon viper into a secured holding tub so she could perform routine enclosure maintenance. The open tub, a snake hook, and cleaning tools were found arranged beside the terrarium, indicating she was in the middle of a standard transfer procedure rather than casual cleaning. The position of the overturned tub and scattered equipment showed that the snake slipped from the hook during the transfer, landing on the enclosure floor near the opening. Gaboon vipers are heavy-bodied ambush predators, and even smaller specimens can shift their weight unexpectedly during handling. Based Based on the viper's final position, it had come to rest only a short distance from Jennifer's reach. When she attempted to redirect it toward the tub, the snake reacted at close range. From this short distance, the gaboon viper thrust forward in a powerful ambush-style strike. Bite marks on Jennifer's forearm showed deep penetration from fangs consistent with a juvenile specimen, and the surrounding blood pattern indicated a rapid, high-volume envenomation. After biting, the snake remained near the enclosure opening until responders later secured it. Evidence of the envenomation's effects appeared quickly. Blood droplets and a smeared handprint on the hallway wall showed she tried to steady herself as she moved toward the living room. Her bag of cleaning supplies was found overturned near the couch, suggesting she may have reached for it out of habit before her strength declined. Over the next 30 to 60 minutes, swelling and bleeding at the bite site progressed, and indicators in the living room, a collapsed posture near the couch and pooled blood on the floor, showed she attempted to sit before losing consciousness. When paramedics entered the home, they found Jennifer unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. Despite resuscitation attempts, the severity of the envenomation and the absence of appropriate antivenom in the region left no viable path for reversal. Following her death, wildlife officers initiated a review of her permits and handling practices, and the incident prompted renewed discussion among local officials about the risks associated with keeping exotic venomous species in residential areas. Wildlife officers and animal control personnel secured the gaboon viper on scene and transported it to a permitted holding facility. The remaining snakes in Jennifer's spare bedroom were removed for evaluation, as several species required state verification of proper documentation. Her employer at the veterinary clinic confirmed that none of the animals had ever been brought onto clinic property, so the workplace remained open, though staff were notified as part of the investigation's standard questioning. The home remained cordoned off for several hours while officers completed enclosure checks and inventory before it was released to her family. No immediate legal penalties were issued, but her permits and housing conditions were formally reviewed as part of routine post-incident procedures. It was August 8, 1995, in the humid evening air of Middlesboro, Kentucky, where the faithful had gathered in a small, white-painted church nestled among the rolling hills of Bell County. The modest building, with its simple wooden cross and hand-carved pews, sat at the edge of town where Appalachian foothills met coal mining country. Outside, the sounds of summer insects filled the warm night as approximately 40 congregation members filled the sanctuary, their voices rising in traditional hymns that echoed through the surrounding hollers. Among the worshipers sat Melinda Brown, a 28-year-old mother of 5 whose gentle demeanor masked an unwavering commitment to her controversial faith. Born January 22, 1967, Melinda had grown up in the snake-handling tradition, watching her elders demonstrate their beliefs through the handling of venomous serpents during religious ceremonies. Her husband, John Wayne Brown, served as one of the church's most respected ministers, and together they had raised their children within this dangerous practice that interpreted biblical scripture literally. Tonight's service held special significance as visiting preachers from neighboring states had arrived to participate in a regional gathering of snake-handling believers. The evening promised to be a powerful demonstration of faith, with multiple serpents brought specifically for the ceremony that would soon claim an unexpected victim. Venomous snakes native to Kentucky represent some of North America's most dangerous reptilian predators, with species like the timber rattlesnake and copperhead inhabiting the state's diverse ecosystems. These serpents possess sophisticated venom delivery systems consisting of hollow fangs connected to venom glands that can inject potent cocktails of toxins into their victims. The hemotoxic venoms common to these species contain cytotoxins that destroy cellular tissue, anticoagulants that prevent blood clotting, and vasodilators that cause dangerous drops in blood pressure. Adult specimens can deliver between 50 to 200 milligrams of venom per bite, with even smaller doses proving potentially fatal without immediate medical intervention. Their heat-sensing capabilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey with remarkable precision, while their muscular bodies can strike at speeds exceeding 8 feet per second. As the evening service reached its climactic moment, Melinda approached the wooden box containing the church's collection of venomous serpents. She carefully lifted a medium-sized snake, its scales glistening under the fluorescent lights as she held it gently in her hands. The congregation watched in reverent silence as she participated in the sacred ritual that had defined her faith since childhood. For several minutes, she moved gracefully through the aisles, the serpent remaining calm in her experienced grasp. Without warning, the snake struck with lightning speed, its fangs penetrating deep into her right palm. The hollow teeth functioned like hypodermic needles, injecting a substantial dose of hemotoxic venom directly into the network of blood vessels running through her hand. The serpent's jaw muscles contracted for several seconds, ensuring maximum venom delivery before she managed to place it back into its container. Within minutes, her palm began swelling dramatically as the cytotoxic compounds initiated their assault on her cellular tissue. The venom spread rapidly through her lymphatic system and bloodstream, causing immediate tissue destruction at the bite site. Her hand turned deep purple as capillaries ruptured beneath the skin, while the anticoagulant properties prevented normal blood clotting mechanisms. The swelling extended up her arm as the toxins attacked her circulatory system, causing dangerous vasodilation and fluid loss from damaged blood vessels. Her blood pressure dropped precipitously as the venom triggered systemic cardiovascular effects. Over the following hours, the hemolytic components began destroying her red blood cells, while cytotoxins caused massive tissue necrosis throughout her arm. Her breathing became increasingly labored as the venom affected her respiratory system, causing fluid accumulation in her lungs. Despite the visible deterioration of her condition and urgent pleas from family members, Melinda refused all medical assistance, maintaining her belief that prayer and divine intervention would heal her wounds. The venom continued its relentless destruction of her organ systems over the next 48 hours. Her kidneys began failing as toxins overwhelmed her body's filtration systems, while her cardiovascular system struggled to maintain adequate circulation. By the second day, she had developed severe systemic toxicity as the venom's effects cascaded throughout her body. Her condition deteriorated rapidly until her organs could no longer function, and she succumbed to complete cardiovascular collapse and respiratory failure. Local authorities conducted a routine investigation into the circumstances surrounding Melinda's death, ultimately ruling it accidental. The incident drew regional media attention, highlighting the ongoing practice of snake handling in Appalachian religious communities. Her funeral attracted hundreds of mourners from across Kentucky and neighboring states. She was laid to rest in the Holiness Church of God in Jesus Name Cemetery in Tennessee, leaving behind 5 young children and a husband who would continue the deadly tradition. It was July 14, 2014, on the marshy northern shore of Louisiana's Lake Pontchartrain, a vast brackish lake where Gulf tides met inland rivers. Its shoreline was wild and untamed, with tall reeds, half-sunken cypress roots, and air heavy with salt and decay. Locals knew the place well. For some, it was a paradise good fishing, peaceful sunsets, and nights where the horizon glowed orange from distant city lights. For others, it carried a quiet unease, a healthy respect for the creatures that called the marsh home. And among those creatures, one stood above the rest as the most feared, the cottonmouth, or water moccasin. Thick-bodied, venomous, and notoriously short-tempered, cottonmouths were infamous in the South for holding their ground. While most snakes slither away at the first sign of trouble, the cottonmouth often stood its ground, hooding its mouth wide to flash the ghostly white interior that gave it its name. In Louisiana, they were a fact of life. In the marshes around Pontchartrain, they were everywhere. That afternoon, 42-year-old Roy Lambert parked by an overgrown levee and headed for the shore with his tackle box and cooler. He'd fished these waters since boyhood, knew the snakes well, and had never had trouble as long as you watched your step. Roy headed to a shaded channel, set down his cooler, and cast his line. The bobber plopped into the still water, ripples fading into the heavy summer quiet. On his third cast, he caught movement in the reeds just off to his left. At first, it was only a faint ripple disturbing the surface, small enough to pass for a turtle or a muskrat. But then the ripples straightened into a purposeful line, cutting toward him. A shape emerged, a broad, triangular head lifting just above the waterline. Two dark, unblinking eyes locked on him. The snake's thick, muscular body slid forward with an unhurried confidence, the wake fanning out behind it. Then the mouth opened, flashing that unmistakable cotton-white interior, a warning. Roy froze, his pulse quickening. The cottonmouth didn't break its approach. He took a careful step back toward the bank, but his heel sank into the mud, holding him for just a fraction too long. The snake closed the distance with surprising speed, head rising higher, tongue flicking in rapid bursts. Roy swung his fishing rod down toward it, hoping to scare it off. It didn't work. In an instant, the cottonmouth struck, a blur of motion that buried its fangs deep into the meat of his calf. The pain was instant and violent, a white-hot burn that shot upward through his leg. He stumbled back, splashing into the shallows, but before he could regain his footing, the snake struck again, this time sinking its fangs just above the knee. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone, sliding back into the reeds, vanishing into the marsh's tangled green. The venom worked quickly. Within moments, his calf was swelling, the skin flushed and tight. A deep ache radiated from the wounds, accompanied by a strange, metallic taste in his mouth. His leg throbbed in time with his heartbeat, each pulse spreading the pain further. Gritting his teeth, Roy tried to push himself upright and limp toward the levee. But each step was slower than the last. His breathing quickened, his chest tight. The path back seemed longer than it had minutes ago, the mud pulling at his boots like it wanted to keep him there. Halfway to the road, his vision blurred. The heat pressed in on him from all sides. He tried to call out for help, but the words came out thin and slurred. His legs buckled, dropping him face first into the warm, sticky mud. Down the shore, two teenagers were fishing off a small dock. One glanced up and saw Roy lying in the marsh, barely moving. They shouted to him, but he didn't respond. Dropping their rods, they sprinted toward him, splashing through the shallows. By the time they reached him, Roy's lips were blue and his breathing shallow. Paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, but his pulse was faint, and he was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. The cottonmouth was never found. Word of Roy's death spread quietly among the locals. In bait shops and on back porches, people shook their heads and spoke in low voices. He was experienced, careful. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. And in the snake-filled shallows of the lake, you weren't always the hunter. Sometimes, you were the prey. It was April 7th, 2016, and the small private lab operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson. The equipment was minimal and suited only for small-scale venom handling, lacking the layered safety systems found in regulated facilities. The workbenches held a sparse but functional set of tools for basic venom processing and storage, reflecting the limitations of a privately run operation. The desert landscape outside provided the perfect isolation for Dr. Nathan Blackwood's controversial venom research. Dr. Nathan Blackwood had a steady research background in venom studies, but colleagues' notes and internal emails repeatedly documented his habit of ignoring routine safety steps. At 43, he was experienced but known for cutting corners, often dismissing standard procedures as unnecessary or too slow. Nathan's privately funded laboratory allowed him to work without the oversight and safety requirements that governed university research facilities. practice. He often worked alone during evening hours, preferring the solitude that allowed him to focus on his experiments without interruption. His recent attempts to isolate specific venom proteins had made him even more confident in his abilities and more dismissive of safety measures. Nathan prepared to extract venom from a large western diamondback rattlesnake delivered earlier that week, a specimen measuring a little over 4 feet, and his intake notes recorded repeated coiling, loud rattling, and striking at the transfer hook during housing. His lab journals showed he had been working through the afternoon, consuming several cups of coffee and rushing to test a new extraction method. Recent entries documented multiple instances of him skipping standard restraint tools, noting he believed they slowed his workflow. The journals also showed an increasing pattern of working alone and bypassing safety steps, a trend colleagues had previously warned him about before he left institutional research. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among North America's most dangerous venomous serpents, with adult specimens capable of delivering massive doses of potent hemotoxic venom. These aggressive pit vipers can strike with lightning speed across distances up to 2/3 of their body length, and their heat-sensing organs allow them to target warm-blooded prey with deadly accuracy. Their venom can cause severe tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure without timely medical treatment. Even experienced handlers treat these snakes with extreme caution, using specialized equipment and safety protocols developed through decades of research. Nathan had decided to test his theory about venom extraction efficiency by milking the rattlesnake directly without using the standard restraint equipment that other researchers considered essential. He believed his superior reflexes and understanding of snake behavior would allow him to handle the specimen safely using only his bare hands, a practice he had noted in his journals as an attempt to streamline procedures. The large western diamondback had been stressed by its recent capture and transport, making it even more defensive and unpredictable than usual. Nathan approached the snake's enclosure with characteristic overconfidence, moving closer despite the snake displaying the same defensive behaviors noted during intake. When Nathan reached into the enclosure to grasp the rattlesnake behind its head, the animal's response was instantaneous. The snake's powerful muscles coiled, and it struck with explosive force, its fangs hitting Nathan's dominant hand before he could react. It delivered a fast strike and release, injecting a substantial amount of venom in a single, clean contact. Phone logs and the incomplete emergency call indicated he recognized the seriousness of the bite based on how abruptly the call ended, but investigators noted that no antivenom was stored on site, likely due to cost and storage requirements, rather than any regulated mandate. The isolated location of his laboratory meant emergency medical services would require time to reach him, time his worsening condition would not allow. Nathan's attempts to call for help became increasingly ineffective as his motor function deteriorated under the effects of the envenomation. The hemotoxic venom caused rapid swelling at the bite site and early signs of circulatory stress, consistent with a severe envenomation. Without antivenom or immediate medical care, his condition worsened steadily before responders could reach the site. His own research notes, scattered across his laboratory bench, documented his dismissive attitude toward the safety protocols that might have saved his life. Investigators used the timestamp on his last recorded instrument activity and the abrupt end of the emergency call to estimate when he likely collapsed. A contracted building maintenance worker discovered Nathan's body the next morning during a routine check of the property. The investigation revealed his reckless approach to handling dangerous specimens and his failure to maintain basic safety equipment. The rattlesnake had escaped through the partially unlatched enclosure door, but was secured by responders during the initial scene assessment. Local authorities documented several safety deficiencies within the lab during the investigation, noting them in the final incident report. It was April 12, 2017, and the rolling limestone hills of the Texas Hill Country stretched under the warm spring sun, their oak woodlands and rocky canyons glowing with fresh color after recent rains. The region's scattered creeks and shaded ravines supported a wide range of wildlife adapted to Central Texas's shifting seasons. Spring storms had triggered a vibrant burst of wildflower blooms, turning normally muted terrain into a photography photographer's paradise. Rebecca Torres had driven from Austin specifically to capture images of the spring wildflowers that bloomed so rarely in this harsh environment. At 31, the graphic designer had built a reputation for stunning nature photography that provided both artistic fulfillment and escape from her demanding corporate job. Her weekend hiking trips had become essential stress relief, allowing her to disconnect from technology and reconnect with the natural world. Rebecca possessed basic knowledge of desert wildlife from her years of hiking in Texas, but her experience was limited to more common species found in accessible areas. She had never encountered a venomous snake in the wild and had developed a false sense of security based on her previous hiking experiences in less dangerous environments. That morning, Rebecca had hiked several miles along one of the hill country's lesser-used trails, following reports of exceptional wildflower displays in areas rarely visited by casual tourists. The recent rains had created ideal conditions for both wildflower growth and increased reptile activity, as snakes and small mammals moved closer to the surface to take advantage of the moisture. Western coral snakes are among the most venomous serpents in North America, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes progressive paralysis. These small, colorful snakes are often confused with harmless species due to their distinctive red, yellow, and black banding pattern. Despite their typically reclusive nature, coral snakes can deliver dangerous bites when handled or accidentally contacted, and their venom typically causes respiratory failure within 8 to 24 hours of envenomation. Their small fangs and secretive behavior often result in bites going unnoticed until serious symptoms develop. While photographing a cluster of bright yellow wildflowers, likely Engelmann daisies, Rebecca noticed a brightly colored snake partially exposed among the flowers, likely displaced from cover by recent rains and increased surface activity. The serpent's bright red, yellow, and black bands created a striking contrast against the golden blooms, and Rebecca immediately recognized the potential for an award-winning photograph. Rebecca approached the snake slowly, and investigators later concluded she had likely misidentified it as a harmless species based on her close camera positioning in the photos. She used a small stick to nudge the surrounding vegetation, unintentionally disturbing the snake as she tried to improve the lighting for her shot. The serpent remained coiled in place, a posture herpetology consultants later described as consistent with a disturbed but non-aggressive coral snake. As Rebecca adjusted her camera position, investigators later concluded, based on faint puncture or scrape marks on her finger and the final images on her camera, that she had come into accidental contact with the coral snake's head. Bite marks from coral snakes can be subtle or easily missed, so the photographs were critical to establishing proximity. The wound characteristics suggested the snake made brief contact and may have worked its small, fixed fangs in a short chewing motion before retreating, a known envenomation behavior for elapid coral snakes when disturbed at close range. Camera timestamps showed she continued photographing the area for several minutes afterward, unaware she had sustained a bite. Because coral snake marks can be minimal, investigators relied on the images, timestamps, and later symptoms to link the exposure to her decline. She then spent several more hours photographing other wildflower sites along the trail, still unaware that the venom had entered her system. The coral snake's venom worked gradually, initially causing no noticeable symptoms as she hiked to other wildflower locations throughout the morning. By late afternoon, early symptoms, fatigue and weakness appeared, which she assumed were due to dehydration and heat exposure from the long hike. As evening approached, the neurotoxic effects became more pronounced, causing difficulty with coordination and speech that made hiking back to her vehicle increasingly challenging. The coral snake venom caused progressive paralysis that eventually affected Rebecca's respiratory system during the night, making it impossible for her to call for emergency assistance. Her cell phone showed no signal in the remote area, and her weakening condition had prevented her from reaching her vehicle before collapsing. Local search and rescue teams discovered Rebecca's body 2 days later when she failed to check out of her reserved campsite. Her camera contained the final photographs she had taken, showing her close proximity to the coral snake and documenting the moments leading up to her fatal encounter. The images provided valuable evidence for the investigation and served as a reminder of the hidden dangers present in seemingly peaceful natural settings. The investigation confirmed her cause of death as respiratory failure resulting from an untreated coral snake envenomation. Rangers recovered her camera beside her body, and the final sequence of images helped establish how close she had been to the snake before the bite. The case was later incorporated into seasonal safety briefings, emphasizing proper wildlife identification and the risks of approaching animals for photography. It was August 11, 2016, and the vast expanse of California's Mojave Desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun as Sarah Williams set up her campsite in a remote canyon far from civilization. The 31-year-old emergency room nurse had driven hours from Los Angeles to find the solitude she desperately needed, seeking refuge from the emotional turmoil of her difficult divorce proceedings. Sarah had been using solo camping trips as therapy to cope with the stress of her crumbling marriage and demanding career. She deliberately chose remote locations to avoid other people, finding peace in the harsh beauty of the desert landscape. This particular canyon offered the perfect combination of isolation and natural beauty, with towering rock formations providing shelter from the desert winds. Sarah was an experienced hiker and camper, but her knowledge of desert wildlife was limited. She had never encountered venomous snakes during her previous camping adventures, which had mostly taken place in less dangerous environments. The prescription anxiety medication she was taking to cope with her divorce had impaired her judgment and slowed her reaction time, making her more vulnerable to the dangers that lurked in the desert. The rocky outcrop where Sarah chose to make camp provided ideal habitat for one of North America's most dangerous serpents. She was unaware that the crevices and ledges around her campsite were perfect hiding places for snakes seeking shelter from the desert heat. Mojave rattlesnakes are among the most venomous snakes in North America, possessing a potent combination of neurotoxic and hemotoxic venom that makes their bites extremely dangerous. They are perfectly adapted to desert life, remaining hidden during the day and becoming active at dusk when temperatures cool. Mojave rattlesnakes are defensive when surprised or stepped on and will strike when threatened. Their venom contains both tissue-destroying hemotoxins and nerve-attacking neurotoxins, making envenomation potentially fatal without rapid antivenom and respiratory support. As the sun began to set, Sarah walked around her campsite in bare feet, enjoying the feeling of warm sand between her toes. The anxiety medication had made her feel relaxed and carefree, causing her to ignore basic desert safety precautions. She was focused on setting up her tent and preparing dinner, unaware that a large Mojave rattlesnake was coiled in the tall grass just steps away from her campsite. Sarah stepped directly on the hidden rattlesnake as she walked through a patch of desert grass. The snake struck immediately, its fangs penetrating deep into her ankle and injecting venom. Sarah screamed and jumped back, but the damage was already done. The Mojave rattlesnake had delivered a clinically significant unvenomation into Sarah's bloodstream. Sarah was 20 miles from the nearest road, with no cell phone coverage in the remote canyon. She attempted to hike back to her vehicle, but over the following hours, the Mojave rattlesnake venom began its deadly work. The hemotoxic elements began destroying tissue at the bite site, while the neurotoxic components gradually affected her neuromuscular function. Sarah's ankle swelled rapidly as the venom destroyed blood vessels and tissue at the bite site. Over several hours, she began experiencing progressive neuromuscular paralysis as the neurotoxins interfered with nerve signals to her muscles. Her breathing became increasingly labored as the venom affected her respiratory muscles. Sarah wandered through the desert darkness, her impaired physical condition and the medication's effects preventing her from finding her way back to the road. The harsh desert environment compounded the effects of the snakebite, as dehydration and exposure to extreme temperature fluctuations added to her body's stress. She collapsed several times but managed to continue walking, driven by survival instinct, even as her condition deteriorated. The cooler desert nights provided some relief from the heat, allowing Sarah to survive longer than she might have during the day, but the combination of partial envenomation, dehydration, and exposure gradually overwhelmed her system. Her neuromuscular paralysis worsened over the days, making it increasingly difficult to move or seek shelter. Search and rescue teams found Sarah's body 4 days later, 2 miles from her original campsite. She had died from a combination of snakebite and venomation, severe dehydration, and exposure to the harsh desert conditions. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been taking prescription medication that impaired her judgment and reaction time, contributing to the tragic accident. Sarah's death highlighted the dangers faced by solo campers in remote desert areas where medical help is hours away. Her family was devastated by the loss, and the incident led to enhanced safety warnings for desert camping areas throughout California. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.